I wondered what Chris Haig's idea of a dinner date involved, and I wondered if I was going to find out. I'd said I'd go along, but that had been on the Monday and the occasion was scheduled for Saturday. In between, I'd been perfecting the storming out and coming home late routine, and it would finish the week off satisfactorily if I failed to show at the appointed hour. It was a time when Adam and I were still playing our game about the insurance money. So I was not only curious, but as suspicious as Mum thought I was. I decided I'd go. I asked her where we were going, but she said she didn't know. Chris would call for us at 7:30. "Does he drink and drive then?" I said nastily, but she said we were taking taxis. "Can't we get a bus in?" "I don't think we're eating in town," which gave me the idea that somewhere like Rossini's wasn't good enough for Haig. This didn't really fit the theory that he was after our money unless he was prepared to lay out a lot in the hope of big returns. I could imagine the headlines after the police tracked him down. High-life con man preyed on widow. Thinking about it made me realise that I didn't know a thing about him. His job, his age, where he lived, whether he had a family. I assumed he didn't have a wife. You could ask the same questions about Hamlet's Claudius, because we don't know anything about him either. Claudius poisoned a man with a grown-up son. Whatever the gravedigger says, you can't think of Hamlet as a man of 30, but he must be about 20 when the play starts. People went to uni much earlier in those days, but he's not a kid. What had Claudius been up to all those years while Hamlet was growing up? Had he always had his eye on the crown? Had he always had the hots for Gertrude? Why did he wait for so long before making a move? Maybe he was waiting until Hamlet was well and truly out of the way in Wittenberg. But even if that's the answer, what had he been doing? Why hadn't he got married and had a family? And perhaps he was married, and one of those things we never find out about is a conveniently dead wife, Hamlet's auntie, who fell out of a window at just the right moment. So I was curious enough to go along with the dinner invite. Come Saturday evening I showered and made myself presentable, but no more presentable than I would have done for Rossini's. Shoes, not trainers, but no tie. I even polished the shoes. Then Mum came down. She'd had her hair cut during the week, but I hadn't associated it with the occasion because she has it done every 6 weeks or so anyway. But the first thing I noticed was her earrings. She hadn't done herself up specially, but there was a sort of sheen about her. No new clothes, but everything smooth and gleaming. Shoes, stockings, skirt, top, makeup. Makeup? She hadn't even been wearing lipstick lately. And then the hairstyle and the earrings. The earrings were new. Had she bought them specially? Had he bought them for her? Well, they weren't embarrassingly flash, not diamonds or anything, but she usually wears studs. I didn't say anything. I was getting good at that. Well, what I did say was, "Well, I do," implying that I must look a bit drab alongside and hope she'd take the hint, but she just said, "Of course you'll do," and went and waited in the living room, and wouldn't let Mindy sit on her lap. Mindy is black and white and only sheds the white hairs, or so it seems, making a special effort for people who are dressed in black, but Mum never minded about that kind of thing before. Mindy went and sat on her wrap, which was hanging over the back of the sofa and is also black. Mum didn't notice, and I didn't say anything. The cab arrived dead on 7:30. Out we traipsed, and there was Haig doing his door-opening act. I went round the back and got in on the off-side so that Mum was sitting between us. I got the impression that she was starting to snuggle, so I said, "Don't forget to fasten your seatbelt," and pointed to the sign, so we all had to get up and find the attachments and fumble. That made everything a bit less smooth. Then the cab got going, and Haig leaned across and said, "I don't suppose you remember me. We met only very briefly." "I remember," I said, as if something vile had happened at the time which made it impossible for me to forget. For some reason this killed the conversation stone dead. I hadn't meant it to, but I wasn't sorry. It's bad enough trying to talk to someone sitting alongside you, let alone someone you don't much want to speak to, and particularly if you're having to talk across somebody else. I wondered how I'd done it so I could do it again. Was it what I'd said, or the way I'd said it? I looked out of the window and left Haig to realise his big mistake in coming to fetch us instead of letting us meet him at the restaurant. But after a bit I began to see it would have been just rude to leave us to make our own way there. At first I wondered why he hadn't driven over himself, but there was a faint scent of whisky in the air which made me suspect that he'd been building up his nerve. I hated to admit that he wouldn't drink and drive. It was a 30-minute trip right out into the country, which starts sharpish at the ring road to one of those country house places that have been turned into restaurants or hotels. Both, in this case. Adlington Manor Hotel. It was a really nice place. You couldn't go there in a shell suit, but it wasn't so formal that anyone just tidy would feel out of place, and the staff were friendly. And they knew him. "Good evening, Mr. Haig," said the girl at reception. Brings all his women here, I thought sardonically. Then I realised he was staying there. "Are you staying here?" I said. "Just overnight," he said. "I live in Leeds." The louse from Leeds, I thought, Adam-like. "Did you stay here when you went to Blueburton?" "Where?" It wasn't fooling. The name of the place hadn't meant anything to him. "When you took Mum out to scatter the ashes." He looked uncomfortable. "Good. I was just driving back from London that time." "What about the other time?" "Times." "Russell!" Mum was beginning to twitter, looking a little less glossy. "Don't be so aggressive." I wasn't doing it on purpose, but it wasn't the moment or the place for that kind of conversation. We were still cluttering up reception, and there was a couple alongside trying to check in, and a family party backing up behind us. "A friend recommended it," Haig said. "Look, shall we go straight to the table, or would you like a drink first? Sarah?" Who said you could call her Sarah, I thought. Well, she had, obviously, and obviously if she called him Chris he wouldn't be calling her Mrs. Jagged, but it sounded odd. "Oh, let's sit down and we can have a drink while we order." Mum sounded a little desperate already, afraid I was going to make a scene. I wasn't, not intentionally at any rate, but what did she expect? What did she think I expected? What was I meant to say to this person I didn't know, who'd got to know her over my head? If she'd ever talked about him, it would have been easier. This half-formal business made it as difficult as it could be. Why hadn't she asked him round to ours for a meal? Perhaps she had, and he hadn't wanted to meet me on my home turf. I wouldn't have wanted to meet him on his. This Adlington Manor Hotel was neutral territory. They gave us a table in a bay window, but you couldn't make out what lay beyond it except for an urn on the terrace outside. In the dark distance I could see the power station lights and knew that Blueburton Hill was out there somewhere. "What do you drink, Russell?" Haig asked me when the waiter showed up. He was trying to say, "What are you allowed to drink?" but being tactful. It would have been more tactful just to let me order what I wanted, but he might have been afraid I'd ask for a double brandy or absinthe or meths. "We usually have wine," I said meaningly, to remind him that we didn't include him. He took the hint and ordered a bottle of red from way down the list, I noticed, and we all studied our menus. They were pricey. I guess the whole place was pricey. This was an expensive weekend for him, putting up at Adlington Manor just so he could take us out to dinner. Mind you, he needn't have done. He could have stayed at a B&B and we'd never have known. It was a very good dinner. Even the starter was so good it gave us something to talk about, and I knew that we were in the presence of a serious foodie. I don't mean he was greedy, but he was interested in what he ate and liked cooking. He and Mum were talking about ways of cooking fish, which was a laugh if he did but know it. He knows now. I looked up and saw aircraft lights climb diagonally across the black window pane. Too late for Concord. Now and again one of them said something to try and make me join in the conversation, but I made do with yes and no and thanks when somebody passed me something. It was like being with two strangers, not one. She wasn't putting on an act or anything, but everything they said sounded like they were making an effort, which they were. Haig talked a bit about work, but I still couldn't make out what it was he actually did, and I thought of that part in Pretty Woman where Julia Roberts asks Richard Gere what he does for a living, and says something like, "But you don't make anything?" That sounded very like Haig's line of work. He didn't make anything. "What are your plans?" Haig said suddenly, in the middle of the main course. Mine was something with ducks in it. His was venison. "Plans about what?" I said. "After school. University." I thought of saying that I was planning to be a rent boy, another conversation stopper, but even I could see that it wasn't a bright idea just then, so I said I hadn't got as far as making plans. I'd think about that after GCSE. It was a lie. I'd once been planning like mad, but in private, because I knew that in the end the future would be GCSE, then A-levels, then Mod Lang at uni. I fancied Bristol, and then travel, anywhere, doing anything, putting the Mod Lang to good use. The reason I'd never mentioned these perfectly respectable ideas was because I could imagine how Mum would react to two of us jetting around the world. Given the way things were turning out, though, rent boy might quite possibly be the only option. "I might join the RAF," I said. Only joking. I added hastily, but the damage was done. I'd reminded her. Of aeroplanes. Aeroplanes equals death. She didn't want to think of that, so she started talking very hard and fast about nothing. I think that's literally true. I can't remember a word of it. It seemed to make about as much sense as Lucky's speech in Waiting for Godot. Haig began to look awkward. I was picking up the signals. They didn't know each other well enough yet to share jokes or talk easily about nothing in particular, or talk seriously about things that mattered. It had been a mistake, coming here, bringing me along. The evening wasn't quite a disaster, it wasn't dramatic enough for that, but it wasn't turning out well. Mainly, if we went on like this, signals would be all I would get. I wasn't learning anything. "How well did you know Dad?" I said. "Oh, it did go quiet." "I didn't know him," Haig said at last. Mum had jumped so much her earrings were still trembling, but Haig seemed relieved. "We were taxiing when it happened." "You hadn't met before?" "Russell?" "Only when we boarded. I sat down first in the aisle seat, then I got up to let him in, and we rearranged our stuff in the overhead locker." "What did you say to each other?" "I can't remember. The usual gripes about seat width and legroom, and rough flying weather. We were just being polite. We never got the chance to be more than that." He stopped. I didn't need to make him go on. The next time he'd looked at the man in the seat beside him, he had collapsed over his laptop. Two complete strangers who just happened to be sitting next to each other, and now here was one stranger talking to the other stranger's widow and orphan. Not just talking, whining and dining them. This man had no more in common with Mum than he'd had with Dad. He'd done the decent thing to Dad because he was too decent not to. But what was he doing now? I looked across the table at him and Mum, who were closer to one another than they were to me. An accident, I'm sure. Mum was nervously gripping her napkin, and I saw her wedding ring with the candlelight on it. And that's when the line about funeral baked meats occurred to me. The remains of our main course were still on the plates. The waiter was just advancing to clear them away as it happened. And some words crossed my mind. Funeral baked meats and marriage tables. I could see those funeral baked meats, the remains of the meal picked over like my duck's legs, and the skin off whatever Mum had been eating, cold juices, congealed sauce, limp vegetables. I didn't know where the line came from then, but I looked it up in the dictionary of quotations at school. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2. I'd never read Hamlet, never seen it, but I got it out of the library and I looked up the line. In context, it was even worse. Horatio, My lord, I came to see your father's funeral. Hamlet. I prithee do not mock me, fellow student. I think it was to see my mother's wedding. Horatio. Indeed, my lord, it followed hard upon. Hamlet. Thrift, thrift, Horatio. The funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage tables. Then I sat down and read the play. Father's funeral, mother's wedding. Suddenly it all fell into place. That was the moment, there in the school library, when Christopher Hague became Claudius.